When modern audiences hear Indian philosophy, they often picture mysticism, meditation, and monks in isolation. But that stereotype ignores the actual architecture of the tradition. The historical texts reveal a highly formalized ecosystem of rigorous logic and analytical debate. To understand this system, we have to look at its own vocabulary. The Sanskrit term for these philosophies is darshana, which literally means a viewpoint or a way of seeing. But classical Indian philosophers also use the term anvikshiki, which translates directly to critical inquiry or investigation. These aren't vague poetic musings. Classical Indian thinkers built their frameworks with a precision that resembles formal logic or software architecture, demanding structural proof for every claim. When you map these traditions as sets of configurable parameters rather than static dogmas, you can actually trace how thousands of years of continuous intellectual debate engineered a highly structured map of human thought. To understand how these schools interact, we have to look at the problem they were all trying to solve. Despite massive internal disagreements, nearly every Indian philosophical school agrees on the diagnostic baseline of human existence. This diagram models that baseline, an endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, known as samsara, characterized by dukkha, a deep structural dissatisfaction. The entire purpose of Indian philosophy is engineering an exit node from this loop to achieve moksha or nirvana. Because they agreed on the problem and the end goal, radically different thinkers could step into the same intellectual arena. They weren't arguing about what they needed to solve. They were arguing over the most mechanically sound way to solve it. Before these thinkers could debate the mechanics of liberation, they had to agree on what actually constituted valid data. This epistemic hurdle split the ecosystem into two distinct families. The dividing line is the acceptance of the Vedas, a massive corpus of ancient texts. This divide is purely based on epistemic authority. Schools accepting Vedic authority are classified as Āstika, or orthodox. Those rejecting it are Nāstika, or heterodox. Without establishing what counts as a fact, logical debate is impossible. Setting this epistemic boundary was the mandatory first step that allowed the broader tradition to fracture into specialized competing branches. Analytical. This matrix maps the core parameters used by different schools. We evaluate their logic based on how they toggle variables like Vedic authority, the existence of an Atman or soul, the mechanics of karma, and their accepted pramanas, their reliable means of gathering knowledge. The top half belongs to the 6 major Āstika, or orthodox schools. They universally set Vedic authority, Atman, and karma to on. To cover all aspects of existence, these 6 schools historically operated in complementary pairs. Within these pairs, the Nyaya school focused heavily on the pramana parameter. Nyaya is the school of logic, dedicated entirely to defining exactly how a human being can acquire valid knowledge without falling into cognitive traps. To prevent logical fallacies, Nyaya strictly limits valid knowledge to 4 acceptable inputs: direct perception, logical inference, comparison by analogy, and the testimony of reliable experts. While Nyaya handled the strict mechanics of knowing, its counterpart, Vedanta, handled the ultimate nature of what is known. Vedanta focused intensely on the highest metaphysics, mapping the exact soteriological relationship between the individual Atman and the ultimate reality, Brahman. By coupling the rigorous epistemic rules of Nyaya with the abstract metaphysical models of Vedanta, the orthodox umbrella constructed a complete interlocking worldview. They had the tools to prove their claims and the models to give those claims meaning.
Below the orthodox baseline sit the Nāstika, or heterodox schools. Their first move is to universally reject the Vedas as an epistemic source, requiring them to build their logic from the ground up. Jain philosophy keeps the Atman parameter on, but redefines it. They theorize an eternal soul inherently endowed with infinite knowledge and bliss, but one that is completely separate from physical matter. In the Jain model, ignorance causes literal, physical particles of karma to stick to this soul. The only way to achieve liberation is to scrape that karmic matter off through intense, perfectly disciplined physical asceticism and strict nonviolence. Buddhism emerged around the same time, but took the exact opposite approach to the soul parameter. The Buddha introduced the radical doctrine of anatta, It asserts that there is no eternal, unchanging self or soul whatsoever. This creates a severe mechanical paradox. If there is no permanent self, what accumulates karma and what actually achieves nirvana? Early Buddhist schools spent centuries designing intricate treatises to explain how cause and effect transfer across lifetimes without a fixed identity carrying them. Toggling the soul parameter from on in Jainism to off in Buddhism completely rerouted their logic. The Jains required extreme physical isolation to purify a permanent soul, while Buddhists required deep analytical meditation to realize the soul never existed in the first place. If ancient India was purely a land of spiritual seekers, the ecosystem would stop there. But the logic demanded exploration into strict materialist extremes. The Cārvāka school looked at the board and toggled everything supernatural to off. They rejected the Atman, they rejected karma, and they rejected samsara. Epistemologically, Cārvāka argued that inference requires assumption, and assumptions introduce doubt. Therefore, the only valid means to establish a fact is direct, physical perception. If you cannot observe it, it does not exist. Alongside the materialists stood the Ājīvaka school. They accepted the existence of the soul, but fiercely rejected the mechanics of karma. Instead of a cause and effect system governed by human action, the Ājīvakas argued for niyati, absolute cosmic determinism. Every event is preordained. Under this mathematical model, free will is an illusion, rendering the entire concept of actionable karma logically useless. The prominence of these hardcore materialists and determinists demonstrates that the ancient Indian subcontinent was a laboratory for empirical testing. Every metaphysical claim was subjected to merciless structural scrutiny. We categorize these schools into neat orthodox and heterodox boxes to understand them today, but historically they did not exist in isolated silos. They shared the same cities, the same patrons, and the same debate floors. This timeline shows the schools expanding heavily from 500 BCE into the Common Era. Their theories collided, generating intense cross-pollination. The skepticism of Cārvākas and Buddhists acted as critical stress tests, targeting logical vulnerabilities in the orthodox frameworks. To survive this scrutiny, the Nyaya and Vedantic schools had to systematically bulletproof their epistemology, tightening their definitions of inference and evidence. Intellectual adversity forced the architecture of these theories to evolve. Hostile debate acted as the engine that drove Indian philosophy to increasing levels of analytical sophistication. The boundaries dissolve into an interconnected network. This ecosystem acted as a testing space, mapping the parameters of human knowledge. Varying inputs, like materialism or idealism, offered different paths to solve the same equation. Indian philosophy remains a rigorous technology engineered for human liberation.